at Westminster. As you well know, the Alberta model of democracy is founded upon the parliamentary process as developed from the British model, which has a history of well over 600 years. After question period today, we will have to deal with some procedural issues which arose out of yesterday's question period dealing with the matter of repetitious questions, and also as to whether or not answers can be demanded. Following that, parliamentary discussion of the budget will continue with the examination of the estimates of the Department of Public Works, Supply and Services.
Let us pray. As Canadians and as Albertans, we give thanks for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the valued traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
For Calgary North Hill.
Mr. Speaker, it is a real pleasure for me to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly some distinguished visitors to our legislature from the United Kingdom. They are in your gallery, Mr. Speaker, and they are members of the Select Committee on the Parliamentary Commissioner for Administration. This particular parliamentary committee is in many respects parallel to the Select Committee of this legislature on legislative offices, and it relates to the office of the Ombudsman. The committee has been holding discussions across Canada, and today they are meeting with our Ombudsman to hold discussions with him and his officials. May I introduce the members of the Select Committee to the members. Sir Anthony Buck, QC, Member of Parliament and Chairman. Mr. Ronnie Fearn, Member of Parliament. Mr. Frank Haynes, Member of Parliament. Mr. James Pawsey, Member of Parliament. Mrs. Sally Desacroix, Clerk of the Committee. And accompanying the delegation, Mr. Speaker, is Mr. Alan Whitmore, Vice Consul at the British Consul General's Office here in Edmonton, as well as our Ombudsman, Mr. Alec Trewick. I would ask all members to join in welcoming our distinguished visitors to the Assembly today.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Chinook.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR 8, Rosebud School of the Arts Act. The purpose of this bill is to provide for the constitution and powers of the school.
The Honourable Member for Chinook has moved first reading of Bill PR 8, Rosebud School of the Arts Act. Those members in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR 8, Rosebud School of the Arts Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Mrs. McClellan, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Private Bill number 6, the Old Sun Society Community College Act. The purpose of the bill is to provide for a constitution and powers for the college. The Old Sun Community College was founded in 1971 and in 1978 became an independent institution operated by the Blackfoot banned in my constituency.
The honourable member for Little Bow has moved first reading in Bill PR 6, Old Sun Society Community College Act. Those members wishing to give consent to first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number PR 6, Old Sun Society Community College Act, introduced by the honourable member, Mr. R. Speaker, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports. Introduction of special guests.
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and members of the Legislative Assembly 3 prominent businessmen from Japan who are seated in the members' gallery. They're visiting our province, one of them for the 5th time. I'd like to introduce Mr. Takashigi Sudo, Mr. Shishio Terioka, Mr. Yoshoyo Kaneyama, and also attending with our 3 Japanese friends are Mr. and Mrs. Jack Bozak, Mr. Harold Wharton, and Mr. Tom Sparrow. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that these gentlemen and Mrs. Bozak rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Edmonton Beverly, followed by Cardston, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've had a number of pleasures to introduce a variety of school classes to this assembly, but today it's particularly special for me because I'm introducing the grade 5 and 6 Overlander class. The significance of their visit to me here is that they're not only a school in my constituency, but they're also a school that is my neighbor. Many of the students here are in fact my neighbors. They caroled at my doors at Christmas times and they have delivered my papers. So I'm delighted to introduce them to the legislature, Mr. Speaker. There are 51 students here. They're accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Nova Gold and Mr. Walter Sednick. They're seated in the public gallery. I ask them to rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Cardston, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my colleague, member for Olds Didsbury, I'd like to introduce 3 members of the grade 10 class and their teacher from the Koinanina Christian School. They are Sherry Hartzler, Shirley Lever, and Tammy Pieper, and their teacher, Sharon Quantz. They're here visiting the legislature, and we'd ask them to rise and give them the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of the legislature a class of 18 grade 6 students from Our Lady of Victory's School. They are accompanied today by their teacher, Marilyn Laundreville. I would ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the members of the legislature.
Minister, Community and Occupational Health.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted today to introduce to you and through you to all members of the Assembly some 27 young creative Albertans. As part of our effort, Mr. Speaker, to improve the health of all Albertans by aggressively promoting the benefits of good health habits, we joined forces with others in the community, including ADAC, Access, Greyhound Bus Lines, and Ched Radio of Edmonton. We teamed up to attack the growing incidence of cancer and began focusing our efforts on Alberta's young citizens. We worked together on a Break Free campaign to promote the dangers of smoking and to encourage teens to think about the risks of smoking and to get them communicating with each other on the problem. And the way they communicated, Mr. Speaker, was through a contest. Some 450 young Albertans entered our provincial contest. They designed posters, they wrote songs, and they produced videos, all of them showing how they would tell their peers to break free of the tobacco habit. And that is why it is a pleasure for me today, Mr. Speaker, to introduce 27 of the 35 winners from across the province, along with 11 parents and chaperones. These creative young Albertans represent 14 cities, towns, and villages across the province, and they're in Edmonton today to attend the Break Free Provincial Awards banquet this evening. I would ask all of the winners and their parents and their chaperones seated in both galleries, Mr. Speaker, to rise, and would ask all members of the Assembly to pass along the traditional welcome.
Tabor Warner.
It's a privilege to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly, Mr. and Mrs. Bob Matlock from Milk River. Bob is a member of the Milk River Town Council. His wife Gail is a member of the Tourism Action Committee. And earlier this morning, they had a meeting with the Minister of Tourism on the new Tourism Interpretive Centre to be located at Milk River. I'd ask members of the Assembly to join with me in welcoming Mr. and Mrs. Matlock as they rise in our gallery.
Ministerial statements.
Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to announce that we, along with the rest of Canada, are recognizing May 1st to May 7th as National Forest Week. National Forest Week is sponsored across Canada by the Canadian Forestry Association and regionally by the provincial forestry associations in cooperation with many agencies and industries. National Forest Week has been held since the 1920s and was originally titled Forest Fire Prevention Week, and it has grown and evolved into much more than simply a fire prevention campaign. It is now a week-long opportunity for those of us involved in forestry to inform, to educate, and to tell people just what our forests do for them and what they can do for our forests. Here in Alberta, I believe that we have a lot to tell. The theme of National Forest Week of 1988 is Forest, a shared resource, and emphasizes the shared usage of Alberta's forest resource and the multitude of activities and products that are derived from them. Our forests are becoming an increasingly important factor in the provincial economy. As a renewable resource, it has the potential to be even more important factor over the long run than Alberta's oil and gas industry. Wood and wood products already contribute close to $1 billion a year to the provincial economy. One would think that contributions like this would go unnoticed, but our forest and the forest industry as a whole have not had a high public profile, particularly in the province's urban centres. That is why National Forest Week is so important. It's our responsibility to make sure that people are well informed and have a good understanding of just what is going on in our forests. Alberta's forests are used for a variety of purposes, Mr. Speaker, and contribute greatly to our economic and social well-being. And to celebrate National Forest Week, we have planned a number of events that focus on the forest resource and its contribution to the people of the province. The town of Cochrane has been designated as Alberta's Provincial Forest Centre by the Alberta Forestry Association and will host a variety of celebrations and events, including an official opening of Jumping Pound Demonstration Forest, a joint project funded by the Alberta Forest Service, Alberta Transportation, the Canadian Forestry Service, and the Canada-Alberta Forest Resource Development Agreement. An auto tour through this demonstration forest will allow the people of our province and from all across North America to see how our forest management practices have changed over the last 100 years and how sound forest management can benefit the forest and its inhabitants. A full slate of events are scheduled for the 10 provincial forest regions in the Green Area and in major towns and cities throughout the province, including tree planting ceremonies, posters, photo and essay contests, school talks, logging competitions, tour displays, and demonstrations. And my department has recently completed a 24-page magazine, Alberta's Forest, which will go out to 500,000 Albertans on April 29th today. The magazine's main focus is to inform Albertans about our vast renewable forest resources and an explanation of our management practices and of the benefits we derive from our forests. We have much to be proud of when it comes to our forest management practices in Alberta, and I encourage members of the Assembly to take the opportunity to participate in National Forest Week activities and promote Alberta's important forest resource within their constituencies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, if I might, on behalf of the Leader of the Official Opposition, respond to the ministerial statement about National Forest Week. It's nice to see government announcements being made on occasion in this Assembly, which is the appropriate forum. And I would like to say that we in the official opposition will always be supportive of important initiatives in the forestry industry as long as we can be assured that they are designed to make use of but not abuse that precious resource. We're concerned that proper procedures always be followed and that the appropriate environmental impact assessment acts be done before projects go ahead. We also are concerned, especially the member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche, about local employment, that these projects that are being announced and that will take place in our frontier regions, if you will be done in such a way that they provide some benefit for the local people, especially Aboriginal peoples who want to be assured of employment on these important projects that in some cases encroach on land that they claim as their own. The other thing that I think is of concern to the official opposition in terms of forestry projects is tied in with the implications of the Mulroney Trade Agreement, and that is local procurement. We're anxious and welcome some government participation in projects as long as we can be sure that local procurement will be a guarantee that we can use Alberta resources and Alberta projects to make these projects happen.
Oral question period.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to direct my first question to the Associate Minister of Agriculture in response to her announcement this morning about the index deferral plan. Now, I am pleased that the government has finally seen the wisdom of my private member's motion, 227, and adopted the first part of that. And I acknowledge that initiative on the part of the Minister to institute a debt set-aside program with an interest-free shelter on the deferred principal. I acknowledge that, Mr. Speaker, but farmers in Alberta are frustrated by the fact that it seems to take years of compounding debt problems and low commodity prices for this government to finally come forward with some sort of a moderate response to that situation, and I think that's got to be recognized, that it's often too little too late by this government. The question to the Minister, and it deals specifically with the interest deferral provision of this loan. Using her example, Mr. Speaker, if the given producer's payment is reduced from $22,000 to $15,000 because of low commodity prices, and the $7,000 put in an interest-free deferred account, can the Minister assure us that if the $15,000 payment doesn't meet the interest required payment on the $200,000 original loan, that amount that's shy will also be put in the deferred account and not subject to interest?
Mr. Speaker, we're very pleased to make the announcement on this program this morning, which shows that the government has support for rural Alberta and for beginning farmers. In terms of the example that you used, any arrears outside of the interest deferral or the deferred portion of the program would continue to have interest at 9%. You have to recognize that there is retroactivity built into the program, which may, in some cases, if commodity prices have been low, increase the benefit that in this case it's a wheat farmer, would probably be able to achieve under this program.
Well, supplementary then, Mr. Speaker, this program does recognize the problems that some farmers are having paying debts, but it doesn't recognize at all the size of those debts. And I would ask the Minister that she take that suggestion of mine back to Cabinet and reconsider it, that the amount that the deferred payment is shy of the principal or interest owing on that loan be also put into the deferred account. Be patient there.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the members of the Assembly that this program has been developed with great care and consideration and a lot of thoughtful input from many beginning farmers in the province. One of the chief benefits of the program, Mr. Speaker, is that it is the interest deferred, and payments that are made in the normal manner, whatever their amount, would also be applied to the principal as in the normal course of payments. So their principal is actually on a declining basis.
I take that as a no, and I think farmers considering taking part in this program might want to compare the total amount of their debt after 3 years as compared to when they participate in this. My question to the Associate Minister, Mr. Speaker, the ADC covers about 1/3 of the total debt that this province has some responsibility for, farm debt. You're also involved to some degree through the Alberta Farm Credit Stability Program. Do you have any intentions to institute provisions of this nature for the almost $2 billion that's lent out through that program?
Mr. Speaker, this program recognizes that the majority of borrowers at ADC are beginning farmers, and in fact the majority of beginning farmer borrowers in this province are covered under the ADC program. In order to ensure fairness to all of the agricultural sector, the Alberta government did introduce the Farm Credit Stability Program, which offers all Alberta farmers 9% interest at a fixed rate for 20 years. So we believe that we've treated the entire agricultural community fairly, and in fact the program has been well received by the agricultural community, but there is no intention to introduce this type of program into that program.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. This will, by the minister's own admission, help approximately 5,000 farmers if they choose to participate, and help them to a fairly limited degree. I'm wondering if the minister is satisfied that this is a sufficient response to the crippling debt crisis that affects not only so many farmers in Alberta, but also the communities that they support.
Mr. Speaker, this is just one of many programs that we have which are of great benefit to the agricultural producers of this province. But I do believe that this program will, in fact, strengthen rural communities, maintain purchasing power, maintain our rural schools, and maintain the fabric and the community organizations in small rural communities. It also gives the farmers operating capital, which will certainly assist them in this year's growing or cropping.
Ball.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the minister, and refers to the paragraph at the bottom of the page, the first page of the announcement, and relative to deferral of payments on a retroactive basis for 1986 and 87. My question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, does this apply to only loan portfolios that are in arrears, and what benefit will go to those young farmers who have made their 1986 and 87 payments?
Mr. Speaker, that's an excellent question, and it's one that we discussed when trying to develop the program. It will not affect only those farmers in arrears. The one, I think, biggest aspect of this program is that it is fair to all ADC borrowers. So if a borrower is in a current position and has a commodity which is far below the ordinary market value, he will be able to take advantage of the retroactive benefit.
Westlake Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the minister, while complimenting her for putting a Band-Aid on a rather massive hemorrhage, could I go a step further and ask the minister whether her department or what process will be followed if a secondary creditor lays a mechanic's lien or tries to do a foreclosure over and around the ADC?
Mr. Speaker, that question is entirely outside of the program, and that would follow the normal process of discussion between a borrower and their financiers.
Vermilion Viking, final supplementary on this topic.
Yes, to the minister, many of the young producers in my area will welcome this program, but they certainly don't want the impression left that they're abrogating any of their responsibilities to their loans. Will the minister assure this Assembly and the people of Alberta that in this program each producer will pay back the total loan and address his or her financial commitment to the Alberta Development Corporation?
Mr. Speaker, it's been a concern of the entire agricultural community that there is a plight in terms of the debt obligations of many of the beginning farmers in their community. I believe that the entire agricultural community supports some assistance to the beginning farmer, and the borrowers who have talked to me have said we recognize our debt obligations, and all we want is an opportunity and an option so that we can meet those debt obligations. Mr. Premier, this program does exactly that. It gives the borrower some flexibility in meeting his loan repayments and recognizes the problems that that can be attributed to low commodity prices. But in the long term, the debt will be repaid.
Thank you. For the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I designate the second question to the member for St. Albert.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Minister of Labour. Mr. Speaker, this government has apparently admitted that its new labor relations code is flawed with respect to the picketing and consumer boycott provisions of Section 81. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the flaws don't end there. For example, Bill 22 contains no provisions to repair the damage done by Bill 44, the labor relations in the healthcare field. This is a legislation, Mr. Speaker, that made criminals out of 11,000 nurses who felt compelled to strike because they had no opportunity for fairness under the legislation. To the Minister, Mr. Speaker, in view of the fact that neither the Alberta Hospital Association or the United Nurses of Alberta asked for this legislation, why do Albertans see regressive labor legislation of this type in Alberta when the minister continually speaks about fairness and equity in labor relations in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the member for St. Albert is as usual indulging in deception. The situation is that one of the concerns the Honourable Premier and myself met with nurses from the University of Alberta Hospital while the rest of the nurses were on strike through the United Nurses of Alberta. One of the concerns they expressed was the perception of unfairness with the parameters given to negotiators and arbitrators. In the compulsory binding arbitration provisions in the current Labour Relations Act, there was a concern that the requirement for consideration of the specific document produced by the Provincial Treasurer laying out the fiscal policy of the government, that was seen as being an unfair intervention, and for that reason that provision has been removed in Bill 22.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister. In Committee of Supply during estimates, the Minister stated that he wasn't in favour of quick fixes. And Bill 44 is an example of a quick fix that failed. Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, why doesn't the Minister heed the advice of the Alberta Hospital Association and the United Nurses of Alberta and repeal the provisions of Bill 44 in his new Labour Relations Code?
Mr. Speaker, the government represents 2.4 million Albertans. In representing those people, we have to bring in legislation that is seen as fair and is reasonable for all the interested parties. When it comes down to closing the hospital services in this province, as happened on 3 occasions in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Albertans very definitely indicated that they felt that that was an essential service that should not be closed down, and for that reason the no-strike provisions were introduced. Those provisions have been amended in Bill 22, apparently to the satisfaction of the majority of Albertans. The parties concerned in disputes in the hospital industry are not the only 2 parties involved. The rest of the general public who use the hospitals are equally involved in these disputes.
Mr. Speaker, during the final days of the nurses' dispute earlier this year, the Alberta Hospital Association demanded a suspension of dues payments to the union. Supplementary to the Minister, will the Minister explain why this unfair demand has now found its way into Section 111 of his new Labour Relations Code?
Mr. Speaker, that's only a small change in the current provisions that exist in the current Labour Relations Act and are carried forward with slight changes into Bill 22.
Mr. Speaker, we now find that Cabinet can terminate the bargaining rights of a union and its members under Section 113 of the new Labour Relations Code. To the Premier, Mr. Speaker, is this the type of legislation the Premier promised Albertans when he said there would be a level playing field and fairness and equity in labour relations in the province of Alberta? Is this what he promised?
Mr. Speaker, several comments for the honourable member. First of all, in his original question, he said something about changing the bills, admitting that there's some change going to happen or something. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing changed from when they asked the question 5 days ago, 4 days ago, 3 days ago, 2 days ago, and 1 day ago, despite the comments from our headline-seeking friends in the Edmonton Journal. There's been no change in the government's position, and that is that the bill is going to proceed through the House in the normal way, and that the honourable members in every democratic parliamentary system have the right, as do members on our side, to study the bill, to debate it at second reading, study it at clause to clause. There's been no change. And for the honourable member to somehow take that there was a change is not so. Now, secondly, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is talking, I believe, about the government's ability to decertify unions. And, Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. That capacity is there when somebody is breaking the law and illegally carrying out actions in this province. And we better be clear with these people who don't have respect for the law, that the laws will be made in the legislature in Alberta, not in the streets chasing around their friend Dave Whirlin or something.
Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by Calgary Glenmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The point here, Mr. Premier, is it's a bad law. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Labour, no-strike provisions clearly don't maintain emergency services. We've just experienced that, quite the reverse, in fact. Will the Minister now tell the House and the people of Alberta who is it that supports this legislation? Certainly it isn't AHA, it isn't AMA, it isn't the nurses, it isn't the community. Who supports the legislation he's put in?
Mackenzie King's mother.
Mr. Speaker, because the honourable member obviously referred to my answer, I want to make it clear that there are lots of laws people don't agree with, but that does not give anybody the right to break the law. And I now take from the Liberal Party's position that they believe in breaking the law. And we want to make it clear. We want to make it clear to the people in the balcony and those watching on television that the Liberal Party's position is you break the law in Alberta. Well, I'll tell you, the government's position and the people of Alberta's position is that the laws are made in this legislature and we respect the laws of this province and we don't make them in the streets.
That's right. Honourable Minister, Calgary Glenmore, then perhaps the Minister. That's right.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, when there are essential services such as the nurses, when they're in place, these essential services, are there other methods for these groups to communicate to the government when they are unsatisfied with their relationship in the hospitals?
That was part of the problem.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, there is an intensive consultative process available to any organization, any group in Alberta who wish to express their concerns. We have obviously just recently, with the creation of the Royal Commission on Future Health Care for Albertans, asked them to give an interim report, an immediate interim report on concerns that nurses have, whether it's about their legislation or other matters. I understand that there are meetings going on with nurses groups and other healthcare groups right now on this matter, and we're looking forward to the recommendations of that commission. I might also say, Mr. Speaker, as I travel throughout Alberta, Albertans tell me that the essential areas in the hospital services are areas that they want maintained, and they want the law maintained. And also, we must point out that there is a fair arbitration process available to anybody who is still unhappy with their negotiations.
Member for West Loch Sturgeon on behalf of the Liberal Caucus.
Mr. Speaker, I ask a question. I think I'll cover a couple of ministers, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the drought we're experiencing now in much of the rural areas of Alberta. I know, Mr. Speaker, coming from Medicine Hat, as you and I do, but we know that drought is one of the most debilitating things that can hit a rural family, rural economy, to see one's crops and dreams wither. Also, Mr. Speaker, seeing that it's one of the major, and this government has said many times, the backbone of the province is not oil, is not manufacturing, is agriculture, so it certainly calls for full demand of their time. First question is to the Minister of Environment, who's been made chairman of the water supply area. Has he further checked? I noticed yesterday he answered in his questions that there was no water injection projects around the area. I have checked with the ERCB, and there are a number of water injection projects out in eastern Alberta in the drought area. Has he made a study of how much fresh water is being used by the oil companies to push out oil?
Mr. Speaker, for a point of clarification, yesterday the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party referred to an area that's known as the Goodrich Lake area spot that a public meeting was held on Wednesday night with the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services, and the MLA for St. Paul. And that is the area that I was referring to yesterday in which I was talking about this whole business of oil and drought. If the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party wants to stand up and say, well, now he's confused in his own mind, as I tried to point out to him yesterday, I'd be very happy to take him on a little tour of Alberta, take him some 50 miles to the east of there, and I'll show him where the oil developments are. Then he would not be confused in his own mind. But to be very specific with this question, of course there's been a review. We've set up in 1986 and 1987 the Cold Lake Beaver River a groundwater review committee. It's a very public committee that's been holding meetings and has held meetings in the area. It includes representatives, public representatives in the area, and I've met with them on several occasions. And I've indicated publicly on several occasions now that there would come a point in time in which I would be declaring and outlining exactly what the groundwater allocation levels are going to be in that area. And I've deliberately postponed doing that, hoping to get a better understanding of what's really happening with climatic change in our province over the last 6 months.
Mr. Speaker, postponement isn't a question, and right now we have the drought, and groundwater is fresh water, Mr. Speaker, for the benefit of this House. As the Speaker, as the Minister of Energy approached, or as the Minister of Environment approached the Minister of Energy to ask him whether or not he cannot put pressure on the oil company to have them use fossil water, not groundwater, not fresh water in service, fossil water, dirty, salty, sulfurous water, rather than fresh water, as he approached him.
Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is most definitely yes, more than approach. Minister of Energy and I get along handsomely well, and we have concurrent discussions on important matters like this on an ongoing matter. I would like to assure the Minister of the Liberal Party that ministers of the Crown of this government communicate, talk to one another, and are very concerned about what is happening. And there have been ongoing discussions with respect to this matter. And in fact, not only has the Minister of Energy been consulted by the Minister of the Environment, but a number of oil development firms in this province have also been consulted with this. On this particular subject matter, and have they also been asked to accelerate concerns with respect to recycling of water in the northeastern part of the province of Alberta to reduce and minimize the amount of water intake.
Mr. Speaker, showering together at the same club is not consulting. Mr. Speaker, what I'm interested in is whether or not the Minister of Energy will make use of fossil water is done, not a facetious remark by the Minister of Environment. May I switch my attention over to the Minister of Agriculture for a minute and ask him whether the Minister of Agriculture is prepared to, now at this date, to backdate the insurance policy that used to apply for drought to farmers back another 2 years so that they can recover some of the capital that they've lost in the drought over the last couple of years so that they can survive on the farms.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not quite sure what the honourable member is requesting. The way he's worded it, I would assume that he's asking for us to have some retroactivity as it relates to the forage insurance that falls under the Associate Minister that we just recently extended beyond Highway 16 to the northern part of the province. I should indicate to the honourable member that our figures indicate that the uptake has been somewhere in the vicinity of 35% in that new area that we recently covered. Acknowledging that fact, it would be very unfair to make a retroactive payment to all farmers in that area when there would not have been the uptake
for all farmers participating. But even acknowledging the unfairness of his proposal, we are examining the proposal that we did receive from the farmers when we were present at the meeting that the Minister of Environment referred to in Goodridge last Wednesday evening.
I think, Mr. Speaker, this government is fair. Once they got the money, you can't get it back from them. Mr. Speaker, the last question is back to the Minister of Environment. In view of his proud announcement that it has started to rain the day of his appointment, and of course, quit raining as soon as the Liberals did well in Manitoba. Mr. Speaker, could I get to the Minister of Environment whether he is now prepared to dig up $5 million a year to put back into weather modification, one of the best programs that was operating in Western Canada? Will he now reinstitute that program to see whether that may not help a little here and there around Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the Water Supply Action Committee is to do everything possible to make sure that we preserve, conserve and utilize water that we have in our province. I have met recently with Mr. Bishop of the water modification area, and it's an area that I'm familiar with over recent years, and I'd like to just clarify, Mr. Speaker, once again, the other day when the leader of the Liberal Party indicated that we had weather modification in this province and perhaps we would need the old Man River Dam, and I'd like to set before him the challenge once again to come and do a tour of Alberta with me. Well, the weather modification area that has received the greatest amount of rain, of course, in the Drayton Valley area. That's approximately 300 miles north of where the Old Man River Dam would be, and there's absolutely no connection whatsoever. And this, of course, Mr. Speaker, is my first opportunity really to clarify that for all members of the House, and including the leader of the Liberal Party. I think that weather modification is an ongoing area that we would need to keep our minds and eyes open to, and we'll have an ongoing review of that matter, and we've had a difficult time in terms of 1987 and 1988 in coming up with dollars. I'm not sure the government will be in a position to come up with dollars in 1988, but it may very well be that sometime in the future we'll have to accelerate some activity in that regards again. Our priority, of course, is now in this year of 1988, conserving, preserving, regulating, and managing water, not sending $5 million in a hope that we would find a solution to it. I can do a rain dance too, but I would like to be more assured that we could have some water here and now, Mr. Speaker.
Vegreville.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Could I have the services of an interpreter next time round?
17 applies. Vegreville.
There's a quid pro quo there, Westlock Sturgeon. To either the Minister of the Environment or the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, I'm wondering if they could explain to members of the Assembly what the limits are through the Farm Water Grant Program to people hauling water from a lake or dugout, or to fill a dugout, pardon me. What are the limits there?
Mr. Speaker, the leader of the representative party asked earlier this week when the specific information would be available, and it's my hope that we'll have a printed document for all members of the Legislative Assembly and all people in the province of Alberta by Wednesday of next week, and I would table that in the Legislative Assembly.
Thank you. Member for Little Bow on behalf of the representative party.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Associate Minister of Agriculture with regards to the Agricultural Development Corporation. And related to the announcement as well today. My question, Mr. Speaker, regarding the young farmers who have already lost ownership rights to their land by quitclaim, and some have negotiated it through the Debt Review Board. They've also have a one-year lease back in some cases. Could the Minister indicate what further considerations would be made for those young farmers in terms of giving them every possibility, an opportunity to stay on the farm on a longer-term basis?
Mr. Speaker, ADC will make every effort to work with borrowers to ensure that they have every option available to them to continue to farm. Where there are cases where it is impossible to meet debt obligations, and where there is no ability to keep farming, they will still work to try and maintain that farmer in the community. On the other hand, they have to be very, very careful that they ensure fairness to all of the agricultural community in dealing with the land that they have.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister. Where collateral has been given by a third party, and in most cases in terms of these quit claims, it's been the parents, and the collateral is lost in terms of the quit claim or the foreclosure, is the government or the Minister considering any policy which would be more lenient in terms of a time frame of repurchase of that respective collateral property by the parents, the third party, or in some cases the son is able to do it? At the moment, the policy indicates a 30-day time period. Has the Minister reconsidered that matter in regards to a more lenient time frame?
Mr. Speaker, I think the member asked a very good question where there is extra collateral put up by a third party. And I believe that some of the policies that we've introduced recently, such as the assumption of the mortgage, might in some cases assist with someone who's in that predicament. I can only assure the member that ADC will be as flexible as possible while at the same time being responsible. But we will, in fact, work with the borrower and with the person who has given equity in order to obtain a loan to ensure that we try to resolve the problem as best we can.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, could the Minister, and this is one question I've raised a number of times in this Assembly, but I'd like it summarized at this time, would the Minister clearly state the reasons the government in their policy reconsiderations would not support or will not support a workout policy for younger farmers, which includes a longer lease-back arrangement?
Mr. Speaker, usually when a borrower has a voluntary quit claim or foreclosure action, it's an agreement between the borrower and the lender that the debt can't be repaid. And the lender takes their loss by accepting the equity that is there, and the borrower accepts that he no longer has a debt obligation. Usually, at that point in time, there isn't the ability to continue farming. And therefore, we look at those cases on an individual basis, but I can't give an overall policy. I do know that the government caucus has directed that we will not become a land bank, and that's part of the consideration. At the same time, we have determined that we will have some flexibility in land lease policy, and ADC is doing that at the present time.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the Minister, and this is with regards to the policy announcement today. Could the Minister indicate, and the policy announced today could have, I believe, assisted some young farmers in a better workout arrangement, but could the Minister indicate why the government did not see fit to put a hold on cases that were under discussion in terms of foreclosure, quit claim, or land sales while this policy was being developed? And could the Minister indicate whether that was a strategy by government, a deliberate strategy, to thin out the young farmer population that may have been in somewhat severe debt situations in this province?
Mr. Speaker, the member knows full well that that statement is totally wrong.
Despicable.
Member for Vegreville, pass. Member for Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Which one? Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't want to make the same mistake again. Mr. Speaker, it's supplementary to the Minister. It is plain good business to hold land off the market. It increases the value, or in point of view, Mr. Speaker, because it increases the value of the land that you're trying to sell, that you've previously foreclosed, it keeps the value of the land up for the farmers that are already holding their land. Has not the Minister had any independent economic advice to show that it would be better to lease out this land rather than to foreclose it and dump it on a falling market?
Mr. Speaker, young people who want to get into agriculture do so on an ongoing basis. There are many people out there who have now reached the age of 21, who weren't 21 in 1980 when land prices were high, and now want to become beginning farmers or young farmers. And certainly we want to give them that opportunity.
Thank you. Member for Ponoka-Rimbe, followed by Edmonton Mill Woods.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my question to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. And the question is with respect to the ongoing effort to acquire for the City of Edmonton certain Canadian national lands in downtown Edmonton, and it's also related to the matter of rail line relocation. Mr. Speaker, I understand that there is some urgency in this matter being brought to a conclusion because of pending changes in federal legislation. My question is the provincial government taking any role in assisting in the conclusion of these negotiations?
Mr. Speaker, the short answer to the question is yes. We've been negotiating with the federal government for some months now with respect to the acquisition of the lands known as the CN lands in Edmonton. The negotiations are going well, and I appreciate very much the participation of the Member of Parliament for Edmonton South, Jim Edwards. I'm hoping that within the not too distant future we can reach conclusion with respect to that site and possibly have it available for uses in the City of Edmonton shortly thereafter.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker, I think that yesterday's announcement with respect to the downtown campus for Grant MacEwan College was very much welcomed by the people of the City of Edmonton and surrounding area. The question is this downtown campus development necessarily tied to the acquisition of these CN lands?
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Advanced Education may want to supplement the answer. My understanding is no, the expansion of Grant MacEwan College is not dependent on the acquisition of the CN lands, though the study indicating the best location for the site has concluded that that would be a prime location. We certainly see it as a possibility should we be able to successfully conclude those negotiations with the federal government.
One further supplementary, Mr. Speaker. The involvement of the provincial government in negotiations usually brings with it, or at least sometimes, certain cost obligations. To the Minister, what are likely to be the cost implications of being involved in these negotiations?
Mr. Speaker, the member is perceptive in recognizing that there's often a dollar amount associated with negotiations. The prime question under consideration with respect to the CN land site is the movement of the rail lines and other items on the site and the costs associated with that. They were estimated to be in the neighborhood of $20 million, but that does not indicate the figure which we are expecting to be involved with at this point. Those negotiations are one of the main factors with the federal government, and I hope to be able to inform the honourable member and other honourable members once we've concluded that we've reached a negotiated settlement on that site which reflects a better price than that.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you. Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, it was a great experience. Short-lived. Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell the House if the government is giving some consideration to a joint venture on that CN land, apart from the railway relocation costs and those considerations, for the development of the land, a joint venture with the city and private interests? Is that one of the things that we're giving some thought to?
Largely, the development of the site itself will be looked after by the City of Edmonton. We have a joint committee which has been awaiting the results of the negotiations with the federal authorities on this issue, which includes representatives from the City of Edmonton, or in particular a representative from the City of Edmonton. And once we have a better idea as to the possibility of obtaining that site and when that would take place, the committee would be more easily able to determine what possibilities there are for it. There have been any number of plans suggested and a number of facilities for the benefit of Edmontonians that have been designed for that. But until we conclude to the site itself and the amount of land that's available and how soon that will be, we're really unable to go much further on that. I know the City of Edmonton has been working hard on that site, and we look forward to further cooperation with that level of government, of course, in addition to the federal members that we're discussing the issue with.
Edmonton Millwoods, main question.
Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday this week we had the situation where the Board of Governors of the University of Calgary felt compelled to go public and say that the provincial government has put them in an untenable financial position. In fact, they said, and I quote, "The board feels that the issue of appropriate and adequate funding now has reached crisis proportions," unquote, Mr. Speaker. Not bad or serious or unfortunate, but crisis. They went further and they said that about 800 students are going to be turned away from the University of Calgary this year and denied a university education. The question I'd put to the minister is simply this: how many more Alberta young people are going to be denied an opportunity to get the kind of education that people like he has had the chance to benefit from? How many students are going to be turned away, Mr. Minister?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed to discover that the honourable member apparently hasn't been listening to the statements we've been making about alternate spaces for students who may be turned away, and I emphasize the may, as a result of various enrollment caps being considered by the universities.
Mr. Speaker, the minister mentioned in his budget estimates an additional funding allocation for people to attend Grant MacEwan College in Northern Alberta, but he didn't mention any similar increase in operating grants for the people of Southern Alberta from Mount Royal College. And I'd like to have him clarify that. Is he saying now that he is now going to be providing some extra funding for Mount Royal to provide university transfer programs for those 800 students that will be turned away this fall?
Mr. Speaker, we have been working on an ongoing basis very closely with the administration of the University of Calgary with respect to their possible enrollment cap for this coming fall semester. We don't know for sure whether or not there's going to be one yet. I don't believe the university administration has made that final decision, but in the event that they do make a decision that limits enrollment, we have alternative moves to consider. The member referred to one of them, that is using the space that is available for transfer courses at Mount Royal College, at Red Deer College, and at locations that may be appropriate around the province.
Mr. Speaker, since representatives from the University of Calgary and the other universities of Alberta are presently attending a national conference on university research in the future of Canada here in the capital city of our province now, can the minister confirm that the reason that he's thumbed his nose at this conference is because he's so ashamed of his government's record of funding university research?
Well, I'm speechless at that kind of question. The honourable member appears to have forgotten that I could have gone to that conference and pointed out to Canada that this government funds post-secondary education higher than any other jurisdiction in Canada. And I could have gone there and told them about the support for research, the per capita expenditure, the per student support, and the superb system of capital facilities. And that would only be the beginning of the list.
The conference is over now, Dave.
I don't know how I could have missed such an opportunity to brag and tell us how we're #1 in the universe. But I want to ask the minister this. Given that the Board of Governors of Calgary University has now given him advice that he apparently doesn't want to listen to, is it his intention to sack them the way he did the board at Westera?
What about the Alberta taxpayers?
Mr. Speaker, I expect more research from the honourable members during question period than to pick phrases out of some second-hand news release. In fact, I understood that those weren't allowable sources for quotes within the House. But in any, no, I'm not embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed. But there's no embarrassment. I'd like to take the member down. I'd like to take any honourable member from this House down to the University of Calgary campus, along with private taxpayers that are supporting that institution, and point out the superb facilities that are there. What did we have there last year? 6 ribbon cuttings, 6 new facilities opened. There's not another campus like that, like the University of Calgary in Canada.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the associate or the deputy premier how he can argue that they're increasing facilities and increasing opportunities in the Calgary universities when the universities have had to increase or raise their entrance requirements in order to cut down the number of students coming in.
Yeah, that is another debate, Mr. Speaker. But the honourable leader of the Liberals does refer to something which is very important, and that is enrollment quotas. Now, for many years in universities across Canada, the professional faculties and schools have had enrollment quotas, and the grades really are smoke and mirrors, because the minimum entry requirement in those quoted faculties has really become meaningless. And a cross-Canada survey shows that to get into professional faculties, because of the number limitations, students require far more than the grade minimum that's been indicated. The only places where those grade minimums are important are in general arts and sciences, and in some cases, education. Now, whether or not there will be the numbers turned away that have been talked about from the University of Calgary today is hypothetical. The University of Alberta has made a policy decision, aside from any financial consideration, that they are going to go to a maximum size of 25,000 students. And that's not based on financing, that's based on a number of other reasons. The University of Calgary is presently considering perhaps limiting enrollment of freshmen this fall for financial reasons, and those are the matters that are currently under discussion between the board and our department.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried.
Overbar. Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister of Advanced Education. Just last week I met with the president of the university and several other interested people, and we were asking this question about limiting access. But the other question came up, Mr. Minister, and that is, what discussion has the Minister had with the University of Alberta especially to look at cutting back in the very, very expensive faculties of medicine, dentistry, law, and engineering, where they are having a gross oversupply of graduates? What are they doing about the oversupply?
Mr. Speaker, for the last 15 to 18 months, we've had ongoing discussions with the entire system, with institutions throughout the system, with respect to the matter of rationalization of services. And just last week, we had our second forum on this matter over at Government House, which included the board chairman and the presidents of all the institutions. I'm attempting to get the field itself, through cooperation, to identify areas of duplication, of non-productive competitiveness, of obsolete courses, all those kinds of things, so that we can go into the next century with a system that's got some rationale basis to it. And the honourable member brings up a very important point.
Time for question period has expired. We have a continuing debate about two purported points of order. First was raised by the Leader of the Opposition with regard to repetition. Further comments on that issue? Member for Vegreville.
Mr. Speaker, this is a ticklish issue to deal with, the matter of repetition in oral question period. From our side of the House, we're increasingly concerned that the government has found yet another excuse to avoid answering questions, and I would like to submit a couple of things to you for your consideration. That just because their answers are repetitive or redundant doesn't imply that the question asked that begged the response is itself repetitive. And though we may choose to deal with similar topics on a number of days, and for obvious good reasons, the offensive bill that has Section 81 in it, that we wish to point out the government's hidden agenda and their desire to take away the rights of Albertans, we're going to continue to hammer on that point, Mr. Speaker, that topic, that issue, by asking a series of different questions over several days in the hopes that that some recognition will be given and action taken on that bill. And I think oral question period is certainly the appropriate place in which to do that sort of thing, because though we can ask those questions during debate on those bills, this is the only forum in which the government can be seen not to be answering them. And with respect, Mr. Speaker, though the issue dealt with, or the topic dealt with, may be the same on over several days, as long as the question itself is different, I think that's got to be considered. And though the preamble to questions may be the same, I may ask a question using the same preamble day after day, but as long as the question is different, then I think we're doing our job and doing it effectively. But I would like to point out for the consideration of all honourable members standing orders, 23C, where it says that a member will be called to order by Mr. Speaker if that member persists in needless repetition or raises matters which have been decided during the current session. Well, needless means presumably that the question has already been answered, which is never the case here, or that the action sought is undertaken. And we've demonstrated that once the action sought has been undertaken, as in the case of Bill 14, then we alter our course and proceed with some other questions. Or that the action, or that the questions deals with matters already decided in the session. And certainly the debate on the bills in question has not proceeded. We're not sure when it's going to proceed, so it's our intention, with your indulgence, to continue asking questions, and for the government to try and avoid explaining its position or understanding its position on this point by just saying, cool your jets, we're going to talk about it later, or the Minister of Social Service on another set of questions saying, well, I might introduce a bill sometime in the future, so I'm not prepared to deal with that now, I think is stretching it a bit. We find that a little too limiting, and with respect, Mr. Speaker, as far as I can determine, Standing Order 23C refers to matters during debate anyway, and there is some reasonable question, I think, whether or not it applies to oral question period. Again, this is a ticklish issue. I think there are a number of citations in Beauchesne that the member for Edmonton Meadowlark drew to honourable members' attention yesterday, and I think that the members opposite, the government ministers, make it very awkward for the Speaker at times to rule on questions when they persist in repeating, I've answered that, I've dealt with it, the bill's coming up, the bill went past, estimates yesterday, estimates tomorrow, but they're seen day after day not to be answering questions, and that's what's repetitive and redundant and boring in this Assembly.
Leader, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I listened to this point of order with some amazement. First of all, because the suggestion is being made by members of the opposition who got into the debate on the point of order that the government is trying to close down asking questions on the employment standards and the labor relations legislation. That is just simply not a fact, Mr. Speaker. There's no place in yesterday's, and I've been through it today, there's no place in there where the government has resisted at all in answering questions or suggested too much repetition. We have said that some of the questions have been answered, and clearly that is so. And, Mr. Speaker, to go even further, I looked at your comments yesterday, and the most you said was that you were becoming very concerned. And then you cited the occasions on which questions had been asked. And you cited April 21st, 22nd, 25th, 22nd, 27th, and 28th, Mr. Speaker. And questions were asked on those days, and in many cases they were, by the judgments of the people listening to them and trying to answer them, repetitious in the sense that the answers had already been given. But Mr. Speaker, no ruling was made that I could detect on your part. You just simply said that you were having to, or implied that your discretion was being tested to make a judgment, perhaps at some future point. But no ruling was made. I simply don't understand what the point of order is about, and if it is simply to use an opportunity, to create an opportunity to allege that the government is resisting and trying to close down questions, that's utter nonsense, and it's not correct.
Thank you, honourable members. The chair is a bit concerned to have this discussion go on and on, knowing full well that 1, 2, 3, 4 honourable members have groups in the gallery whom they wish to introduce and have that courtesy of the House. The chair listened in its opinion sufficiently long enough yesterday with regard to the purported point of order raised by the Leader of the Opposition, and the chair concurs with the comments that have been made here, especially by the Government House Leader, that indeed the chair was only giving an admonition to the Leader of the Opposition and dealt with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days in which very similar questions had been raised. The member, the Leader of the Opposition had not been called to order. It only been a matter of an admonition with respect to the matter of repetitious questions. And as has been pointed out, it was the chair that was doing the operation, not the chair's own initiative, not anyone else's. Similarly related, the chair also directs all honourable members to the statement as made to the House on a similar issue on April the 19th. Therefore, with regard to the first purported point of order, there is no point of order. With respect to the second issue, which was raised by the member for Edmonton Meadowlark, basically in an examination of the Blues, it's a question of whether or not it is again a complaint that the answers are not being given to the satisfaction of the member. And once again, the chair refers that honourable member, when the member does return to the House, to page 602 of Hansard of April the 22nd. And again, the basic quotation goes back to both Beauchesne as well as to Erskine May. And with regard to Beauchesne, it's 363, both subsections 1 and 2. And rather than read it into the record, I trust that all honourable members will look at what all of the words say and not just the carefully selected reading thereof. But again, the buttress to that is with Erskine May, page 342. Questions already answered or to which an answer has been refused. Questions are not in order which renew or repeat in substance questions already answered or to which an answer has been refused, or which fall within a class of question which a minister has refused to answer. A question which one minister has refused to answer cannot be addressed to another minister, and a question answered by one minister cannot be put to another. An answer to a question cannot be insisted upon. If the answer be refused by a minister and the Speaker has refused to allow supplementary questions, the Speaker then has refused to allow supplementary questions in these circumstances. The Chair realizes the fine arguments being made that in the opinion of some members that answers have not been given, but nevertheless it's still a matter of complaint on behalf of the member for Edmonton Meadowlark that he doesn't like the answers or the lack of answers being made, and the Chair has absolutely no authority to direct a minister of the Crown to give an answer to the satisfaction of any member.